Hey, it's Sol, and I'm going to talk about legendaries again. I made a couple of videos previously as sort of a quick reaction to them, and I didn't want to go very in depth with them because we weren't too sure how the system was going to play out, and there's just too many legendary items to talk about. But after hearing and seeing the feedback on them, and especially now that Blizzard has come out to clarify on how they'd work in the first few weeks of the expansion, I'm ready to dive into this and try to clear the air. Once again, this won't be an overview of the items, but more of an analysis and speculation of how the system will work for a typical player, and my scope is going to be very, very narrow. Like this narrow. Sorry, Protection Paladins are what I know more than anything, but remember, this is a video about the legendary system. I'm going to have pros and cons, critiques, and suggestions for the design team, and I jump cut, so hey, I can edit out my emotions, so this will be short. But I've been talking too much already, let's get started. For this analysis, I looked at Wowhead and I looked at every legendary item that a Protection Paladin could theoretically use, and I'll list them really quick. An amulet, 3 rings, 2 chestices, 2 boots, gloves, helmet, legs, 2 bracers, a belt. Just about all these pieces have an item level of 870, which according to Wowhead is the same item level as Elite Season 1 gear. So we can presume that this is like mythic item level. Also, at the start of Legion, players will be limited to wearing only one legendary thingamajigger at a time, and according to data mined about Order Hall talents, whatever that is, we'll be able to unlock at least one more legendary slot as we progress through the expansion. On top of that, legendary effects will be disabled during the first few weeks of the raid season, effectively nullifying fears that the World First race will be compromised. Of course, the top 100 race will be totally compromised, but no one's perfect. All in all, this takes a lot of the teeth away from fears of stacking every legendary and having endless farm groups. Of course, I have no doubt that farm groups will still be a thing, but with these restrictions, there are clear maximum benefits for possessing multiple legendaries. The recent announcements also imply that Blizzard is kinda sorta leaning away from the earlier statement of legendaries being super rare, because they're clearly balancing around the fact that many players can and will have multiple legendaries. So, Prop Paladin. Let's pretend that I'm freaking awesome and managed to get every legendary I could possibly use within the first week of the expansion. Just how badly did I break the game? The short answer is not by too much. Let's do an overview of the items though, so we have an idea of what's going on. Here's the more or less universal amulet. After not taking damage for 5 seconds, you gain an absorb shield worth 30% of your maximum health for 30 seconds. Depending on the encounter, this could either be really cool or impossible to proc. 30% is a lot of life, but notice how we don't know what the internal cooldown is on the proc. If there's no cooldown, this is an okay off-tank neck. If there is a cooldown though, it'd be a clusterfuck to control how we make this work reliably. Also notice that there's no primary stat present, just mastery and stamina. This is probably better suited for world PvP or otherwise anyone but a tank due to how unreliable the proc is. Now for this crowd control ring. After doing some sort of CC, you move faster. This ring is stam-packed, but I don't see a whole lot of use for this unless it's useful for a tank to run away and kite stuff. Cool for PvP, but probably low priority for PvE stuff. Heathcliff's immortality gives you damage reduction while standing in your own consecration. This ring is pretty damn strong even without the strength. Keep in mind that there's no more glyph that lets consecrate move with us, but there is an artifact trait that gives a little bit more uptime on consecration, ensuring pretty much full uptime on the proc. This chest will give us cooldown reduction on each target hit with Avenger Shield. This chest can be pretty damn broken if Hellfire Citadel 4-piece is still functional at max level. Of course, that means our helm, legs, gloves, and shoulders are going to have like 150 less item level on them, so there's a pretty scary trade-off. These gloves shorten the cooldown on lay on hands from 10 minutes to 3 minutes. That's kinda cool. I'm curious to see how it'll synergize with this artifact trait. Gaze of Justice. I'm not quite sure what the deal with this effect is. I mean, it sounds good outdoors, but it's useless on bosses, and the hammer doesn't really do damage, so the 350% damage probably refers to like weapon DPS or attack power or who knows what. These Avenger Shield legs look pretty awesome for tanking multiple mobs. So far we can't spam Avenger Shield like we can with the previous tier bonus, but if this is paired with the chest that I mentioned earlier, we can reduce the cooldown on our Guardian by up to 24 seconds per cast. These feet don't do anything right now, and neither does this ring. This Blessing Belt is probably more useful for a Holy Paladin or for PvP, and this rest would probably make a good pairing for it. Finally, there are these 3 items that are worth mentioning. They have an item level of 940 and the primary stats to match, but no secondaries. They're labeled as consumable on Wowhead though, so they might be some sort of token that applies random stats if you use them. You know, like a legendary Thing of the Eagle, for example. Alright, so I have all this snazzy gear and enough time has passed that I can start using this stuff in the first tier of raiding. Let's go to like the super extreme. In a world of being able to wear every legendary at once, how would all of this feel? Probably not as great as you'd think. I mean, yeah, we get to wear all this cool stuff, but while we have pretty much a mythic item level, we're missing up to 10 slots worth of primary or secondary stats. I probably wouldn't sim so great. But it's not going to be the case, and similar to how we choose talents based on an encounter, I'm going to choose the ideal legendary for the right situation. If I'm going to play an ad-killing off-tank role, I'm going to use these fancy schmancy legs. If I'm main tanking and not moving a whole lot, I'm going to use this ring. These items perform their roles quite well. 4% reduced damage and 100% uptime is pretty big for a single item, and Avenger Shield hits hard enough to be a fair DPS contribution. But is it broken? Probably not. This is similar to having a fancy trinket, and it's going to make a noticeable difference during progression, but after a few weeks of raiding when legendary Aprox finally do work, it's not really going to be a big deal, just a deal. Alright, so let's fast forward to the second tier of raiding. How are legendaries going to feel then? This is speculation, but let's run with the idea that we can now equip at least 2 legendaries. Sweet! Now I can take these legs and this chest and I can go nuts with my Avenger Shield. But hold on, there's a few drawbacks to this now. The really awesome synergy that I want gets in the way of having the previous tier's 4Ps, which we'll assume that I got. And here's the bonus. This bonus is a pretty big deal because Light of the Protectors are primary self-heal and has a pretty long cooldown, about 15 seconds baseline. The heal's been nerfed since my last video, but it's still a strong heal that scales with our life, so we have to make a big choice between basically having higher DPS and a shorter cooldown on our big defensive ability, or more frequent self-heals and the freedom to use any of these other legendaries. So, you know, choices. On top of this, if we take the item level difference between Mythic Blackrock Foundry and Mythic Hellfire Citadel and apply it to Legion, Mythic gear in tier 20 will go up to 910. In light of this, just how long will legendary gear be useful? They certainly change skills enough that there's a certain utility or a throughput increase to them, but by the second tier, players are going to be deciding between a legendary or a replacement item that has a higher item level as well as secondary stats, or like tier. So, you know, again, choices. In the current game, choice isn't a very big thing when it comes to raid itemization. Traditionally, we're used to best in slot list, sims, and well, basically relying on someone else to tell us how to gear and play. For some players, this practice subconsciously invalidated the feeling of customizing gem slots and enchants and reforging and other upgrades, and this isn't really their fault. Warlord's random bonuses in the form of tertiaries were one step in the direction of breaking this paradigm, but it didn't quite give players real options. It was more like, hey, I'd better farm the raid more so I can get this Warforged socket thing. This has been my opinion, and I'll reiterate that this is how I'm interpreting the system, but legendaries play out like this additional push to give players meaningful choices on what to gear. There's no doubt that theory crafters are going to figure most of this out as they usually do, but I'll give Blizzard credit for trying to push us in an attempt to throw a wrench in the calculation and take the risk of adding something chaotic or maybe even fun. But here's something about this new system that sort of restricts choice, and that'd be gear in these not set slots. Going back to the Pally, this ring is arguably the most powerful thing in the lineup. The only scenario that would make me take this ring off would be if I were to use the leg and chest combo without a huge penalty. Otherwise, no ring, even with secondaries, could provide the stats to be better than this. In my opinion, the more powerful legendaries should be in the same slots as set items to give players a more difficult or meaningful choice to make, if that's even possible. Maybe it'd be better to just restrict legendaries to only these 5 slots. Now let me go back to these 940 pieces. There are 3 pieces for the chest, feet, and wrist slot that may or may not give secondary stats, but regardless, these are 940s, higher than the theoretical item level of tier 20 mythic gear. I don't think it's a good idea to have things like this drop that effectively makes most other drops in the same slot crap by comparison. Now think of the paradigms that we have today. We already have more gear dropping from raids that have done so in the past. We have class tokens for tier or for stuff like those Archimon trinkets. We have armor with secondaries that change with our spec to nullify that old intelligence plate scenario. Some of these are welcome quality of life changes, but I could also say that this accelerates gearing and potentially shortens the lifespan of progression, and I'd be right. In Legion, we're going to have artifacts that effectively remove weapons and offhands from all loot tables. Now we have these kinds of legendaries that potentially nullify upgrades for what could possibly be the entire expansion. Unlike gear with legendary effects, these are just straight upgrades, and I don't think that's okay. It may not be all players, but WoW gives most players the opportunity to overcome their greatest challenge. Gear is a mechanism for that, and repeatable content is one of the pillars of this sort of MMO gameplay. The potential to negate even one gear slot risks compromising that, and we're already losing at least 2. I suggest not going through with this. It's not necessary, and the gear is boring. It doesn't give that awesome, legendary feeling that was touted when this system was introduced at Blizzcon. And here's another potentially huge thing. Currently, we don't know how itemization will be for challenge mode dungeons or LFR, but if it's anything like Warlords where only normal and higher rating has access to set bonuses, there could be some crazy power differences between players out in the open world. MMO Champion won't be happy to see that only traditional raiders can be decked out in both legendaries and set bonuses. Something's gonna have to give, and if the legendaries go through as they are, making tier sets available through PvE currency is probably the easiest, most universal, and most fair implementation. And that's all I got. That was pretty long, huh? Thanks for making it to the end, guys. I hope that at least something here hit a chord with you guys, and if it did, like and share this guy, mention it to Blizzard or something. The system obviously isn't perfect, and if we bring up our concerns now, hopefully things will be better by launch. And that's the end. I'm Soul. Stay breezy, guys.